I'm Richard Bliss. I am here. I live in Silicon Valley. Thrilled to be here. JT did ask. I turned him down. I did. Had some life changes happen over the summer. It was like suddenly my schedule was free, and I thought, I can do this. Let's go and enjoy ourselves in Madison, Wisconsin in November. Living in California, that seemed like a really great idea at the time. Okay? The good news is the weather has been quite cooperative, and the people have been pleasantly predictable, as in having those wonderful personalities of the upper Midwest that just makes you feel welcome no matter where you go. How you doing? Okay, we're doing good, okay? Hey, Steve. We're going to start. Try not to heckle me as much as I heckled you in your panel. We're going to talk about the future of crowdfunding. I get to talk about crowdfunding quite a bit, particularly in Silicon Valley, because there crowdfunding is seen as something very different than what we see it as. Crowdfunding there is really focused around equity. That is, I want to raise money for my company, and I'm willing to give up a piece of my company in order to do it. Within the last couple of weeks, the government passed regulations that now allows you to crowdfund securities, basically to give up a piece of your company by soliciting people across the internet and other ways for that. But there's all kinds of crazy restrictions on it. You got to jump through all kinds of crazy hoops. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like you can only get a maximum of $1 to $2 million doing this. Well, that's crazy because we got board game publishers now that are pumping out $1 million, $2 million projects without giving up a single piece of equity. And so one of the things I often talk to the equity folks is that they're missing the boat. That there aren't a bunch of people sitting around with money burning a hole in their pockets that they want to do micro-investing in companies. But there are a lot of people out there who are really interested in passionately backing and participating in a crowdfunding project. How many of you have listened to my podcast? Okay. How many haven't? John, have you not listened to it? Okay. Funding the Dream, you can find it on iTunes. Go take a listen. Okay. It's a great place to go start. So, not to single you out, but I know your name and I noticed you didn't raise your hand, so that works. All right, there we go. One of the things I say on there is that crowdfunding, so many people come to me and they say that they need my help. And the first thing I do is I go to their campaign and I see they have 0 backers, 0 funding. Not even their mother backed them. And I tell them, you don't have a funding problem. Money is easy to find. You can beg for it, borrow it, steal it, hit your parents up for it. Money is actually quite easy, and it's what makes our society move. What's hard to find and hard to fake is a crowd. There are crowdfunding campaigns that if you follow KickTrack, you can notice an anomaly where they'll go along, and they're not quite making it, and all of a sudden they have this huge spike in funding, but they didn't get any new backers that day. What happened? They funded it themselves. They found a way to get somebody to go dump a bunch of money. I'm telling you, you can fake the money. You can find ways. What you can't fake is a crowd, and that crowds come before funding comes. You don't have a funding problem. You have a crowd problem. And I also say that crowdfunding is like stage diving, crowd surfing. If there's no crowd when you launch, it's going to be a very painful experience. Okay? You're here to hear me talk about a little bit of what I think the future of crowdfunding is all about. Well, Kickstarter as a technical platform isn't going to change much. What we've seen over the last couple of years is what we're going to see over the next couple of years. And this is a conversation Steve and I had just recently. Their interface sucks. The way that you build a campaign sucks. There are so many things that are so painful about using Kickstarter as a platform as a creator or a backer. It just drives you nuts. But Kickstarter is under no incentive whatsoever to make drastic changes to their platform because it's working for them. It's working. And oftentimes their response to input is they're interested in meeting the greatest amount of needs of their project owners, but at a level that maybe doesn't dwell down deep into some of the limitations or challenges, because we're still putting project on there and people are still backing it. So nothing's broken for them. One of the reasons is because they really are focused on meeting a certain need of different types of backers. They're not interested in equity crowdfunding. They're not going to get into that. The founders have come out and said quite strenuously that there's no interest for them. They want to continue doing what they're doing. So the future, though, isn't necessarily in the platform itself, but the impact that crowdfunding is going to continue to have. And we're here as board gamers because, and if you've heard my panel or some of the other panels, it's had a huge impact over the last few years, the 4 or 5 years that it's been very active in the board gaming space. We can go out and look. One of the things is that just the sheer volume of games that are out there. You know, you've got a board game review site, right? How many solicitations do you get for people to review their games? 20 a week, 5 a day, 4 or 5 a day, 4 a day in a week. And how many are you able to respond to? 2 or 3. And so then, James, you're a publisher. How many people are hitting you up for them to look at their Kickstarter game? How often? 1 or 2 a day, right? In the olden days, and Steve Jackson here is in the audience, who represents a day when it used to be a much, right? We've joked about how a much calmer era. Calcified is the word I use, but yes, a much calmer era where things were fairly predictable and you had a development schedule. Things have radically changed. So some of the changes that you're going to see are going to be what I consider, Steve had just touched on it, and I agree 100% with what he said, and I talk about it a lot, an ecosystem. Kickstarter has formed a new ecosystem for the board game industry. It has poured so much money into our little industry that our little industry is now getting noticed in a major way. When people talk about, what's one of the hottest televisions on show that shows board games? What's one of the hottest shows on television that actually shows board games sometimes as plot points in the show? Help me out. Big Bang Theory. Okay, the old guy in the room just scooped all of you, okay? You were thinking about it. But what's that, Tavis? Right. Board games have now entered into the psyche through a variety of means in a way that they really never did. All right, and Cards Against Humanity continues to be that outlier. Let me give you an example. I was at Berkeley at an international crowdfunding conference, and I was interviewing a top lawyer in the crowdfunding space. And I said to him, as we're standing in Berkeley, I'm in a suit, he's in a suit, we stood out like sore thumbs. I got a camera, a microphone, and I said, let me tell you something, how come you're missing the boat here? Because they were all about equity-based crowdfunding in a variety of countries. I said, see that group of students over there? They all know about crowdfunding, every single one of them. He says, what are you talking about? I said, watch this. I had a button on my lapel that said Cards Against Humanity, okay, a little tiny button. And a woman walks by, a college student with a backpack, and I said, excuse me, camera's here, microphones, he's standing there, totally unscripted. I just grabbed the first student walked by. I said, stop, excuse me, can I ask you a question? She's like, sure. Have you ever heard of, that's what I said, do you know what this is? Oh my gosh, where did you get that? Did you create that game? I love that game. That game's awesome, blah, blah, blah. I said, do you know anything about Kickstarter? Oh yeah, excuse me, yes. It was on Kickstarter, but now I get it on Amazon. Oh, it's awesome, blah, blah, blah. Thank you very much. Go ahead and move along, okay? You know what he says to me? He says, oh, no, that was just a fluke. That was a coincidence. No. We in the board gaming space completely understand the impact that crowdfunding is having on every aspect of our industry. And one of the things that we're going to see in the future is that this is going to permeate into other industries. Comic book industry has been totally turned upside down by Kickstarter. I mentioned dance, right? Dance funds at 86% of the time. If you put a dance project up on Kickstarter, it's going to fund. Because why? Who has a theory on that one? Yes, ma'am.
Because if you're going on Kickstarter to back something like dance, you're most likely on there for dance. So why would you back it?
That's one. That's a really good answer. Or, yeah.
It's cheap.
It's cheap? I'm not sure I agree with that one. There's some cheaper ones out there. Yeah.
There's not that many projects to fund.
You could say that, but there are other categories that have fewer projects that don't fund nearly at that level. Dance funds at double the rate of the average Kickstarter. So they fund almost double. John? Passion. And elaborate on that. Okay, that's close. Andrew? Community. Can you dance successfully by yourself? It's very difficult. Actually, it's extremely easy, okay, because you're only the judge of one, right? But it doesn't really work. There we go. Can you dance by yourself when people are watching? Dance, by its very nature, is community-based. And you can't go out there and just create a solo dance project. Well, you could, but it's through the appreciation, John's point, passion. So community is a key component of dance. The board game industry continues to have success the way it does with their crowdfunding because of Community. And I had mentioned earlier in one of the panels, Steve, yes?
What's the funding rate for board games?
36% is the funding rate for board games. 2 out of every 3 projects on Kickstarter for board games fail. Unless you're an RPG. If you're an RPG, you fund at, somebody want to take a guess? 12%. Between 70 and 80% of the time you fund. Yeah, you were talking about the failures. You were right. About 12% fail. Isn't that what you were saying?
No, I was guessing success.
Oh, I was helping you out, Steve. I was trying to help you out. You're supposed to. Okay, that was a little slow on that one. All right. 70 to 80% of RPGs fund. Now, some say, well, it's a smaller number. Well, yeah, that's true, but it's not that much of a smaller number. Their average, I think, is about $11,000 of funding as an RPG. But RPGs, by their very nature, are community-based. They're collaborative. It's hard to have an RPG with just 2 players. You can, but it's not really the point. And so what I'm saying here is that what you're seeing is the future of crowdfunding is digging deeper and deeper into smaller and smaller areas where traditional funding would have never reached. And because all this money is pouring in, it's causing a total segue here. There's a desert in northern Chile that gets almost no water, okay, ever. And they recently, because of El Nino, got more rain in like one day than they have in the last 20 years. And if you go out and look up the pictures of what's happened in one day, there are miles and miles of purple flowers that have popped up in a desert that has been dry for 20 years. And then you'll go to another section, and it's just yellow flowers forever. And I saw the train going through, and an area that's normally brown with sand is just covered in purple. Because what happened? Moisture, water, the thing that sustains an ecosystem poured in, and suddenly, where nothing was before, it sprung to life. That's what's happening with crowdfunding right now. Into all these niches, dance, or food, or publishing, or podcasts, or webcasts, you're seeing this change. And the reason this has an impact on you is because as you start to think about your involvement with the future, Patreon is a crowdfunding platform. How many of you are familiar with Patreon? Okay, how many aren't? John, you get to raise your hand again. All right, cool. Patreon is, kind of crowdfunding, but I will give you money every time you create some type of serialized content. A webcast, a piece of music, a web cartoon. It had a huge impact. Steve and I were talking on the web cartoons, where traditionally you only made your money through advertising by running banner ads to interrupt the experience of your fans, right? Literally to make the experience less pleasurable. That's what banner ads do. That's how you funded that artwork. You were willing to tolerate consuming it because that was how it got funded. Patreon says, look, I'm going to create some content. You're going to give me some money. I'm going to create the content anyway and give it away for free, but you're going to create some money, give me some money for that. You're going to give me $1 a month. So I have a good friend, Howard Taylor. He does a web cartoon called Schlock Mercenary. Howard he's been giving it away for 15 years for free. He put it on Patreon and said, look, if you give me $1 a month, I'll let you see the web cartoon a day before it goes live. Okay? I mean, what's that worth to you? It might be worth a little bit. I think he gets 4,000 people to give him $1 a month. You understand what I just said, right? He makes about $50,000 doing nothing different other than showing these people his web cartoon that he already created a day before he shows it to everybody else. Right? Yes, Steve?
One reason he can pull this off is that in 15 years he has never failed to put up a comic on time every day. Unlike most webcomic artists.
7 days a week, 365 and a quarter days a year for 15 years, he's never missed once. Right? That's impressive. And you know what his fans have been willing to say? Because you have put that type of dedication in, I'm willing to give you money to give me something for free. I'll just keep giving you money. And so the future is crowdfunding is pouring cash, just cold hard cash, into an economy that for decades has been calcified by the traditional method of we leverage our house or we leverage a loan and then we spec. And the model's been turned on its head. And you're going to see that model continue to change because it's allowing a new economy to grow. And we're seeing some changes for that. James, you shared a piece of information about Panda Games, about their manufacturing plant. Is that public knowledge?
Yes, it is. So,
Okay. Yeah, you go ahead. That way I won't get blamed. Okay.
this is not me, so Panda has been really kind of catering, and they saw the need catering to the people that are doing these Kickstarters, and they only need decent games out there. And Panda said, well, we're going to set a certain level of quality, and we're going to help everybody achieve that level, even though you don't know diddly about how to create a board game. So we're going to help you through that process. In that process, they ended up getting tons and tons of people coming their way, wanting to do board games. So it kind of slowed them down a little bit, but they've been slowly increasing. They've doubled their staff like every year for the last 3 or 4 years. Anyways, just this last year, they bought the factory now.
So let me restate what James said so that everybody can hear it. Panda Games is the largest board game manufacturer dedicated to Kickstarter games. I'm going to qualify it that way. They're not the largest board game manufacturer, but they're the largest that they cater to your Kickstarter games. Okay? And they've become more and more and more successful. Is it the Lee brothers? Yeah. Richard and Michael? Yep. They've become very successful. So successful that they turned around and bought the factory that they've been outsourcing to in China. Where did they get the money to buy the factory that they've been outsourcing to in China? Kickstarter. Kickstarter gave them the money through several channels, but so much money that they were able to actually turn around and buy that. We're here at CrafterCon. JT invited me to come, and one of the reasons is I'm a big fan of the Game Crafter. Have been for years before before JT and I connected with, because in my industry, I work in the tech industry, I'm always looking for that next trend. It's what, right? I live in Silicon Valley, and we just churn through trends, always going on. And I noticed a couple of things. One, that's how I got involved to where I'm standing before you today, is I noticed that the crowdfunding and the board gamers were coming together. Oftentimes, we as human beings contribute success to individual effort and failure to external forces, right? If we fail, it wasn't our fault. If we succeeded, we get all the credit, okay? Firstborn children are really good at that, by the way, me being a firstborn child. So yes, they're really good at that. I noticed that board gamers were having some success on Kickstarter. But the way we are, they're thinking that they had done something unique or different that caused that success, and it wasn't necessarily the platform. And I realized that the platform was transforming the industry right out from underneath them. And yet, because they weren't looking at the pictures, they were looking at their own efforts, they didn't see the connection of the dots. I got out in front and decided to do my podcast to help connect the dots. Steve made a comment in the last panel that he was on that it takes a cataclysmic event to wipe away that canopy and the ecosystem that exists for funding, to keep that value chain going. And one of the comments that was made by James and Jason, and I believe it, is that I believe that Kickstarter has been that cataclysmic event in the board game industry. And in a slow-moving, almost imperceptible speed of change, the board game industry is being changed so that you now are sitting here with the possibility as an individual of becoming your own game designer and publisher and actually finding the money to fund that. Some changes that you're going to see coming in the future are, for example, I just got off the phone with Jamie Stegmaier, who is very prominent in what he's done. 6 years of blogging, tremendous amount of content for Kickstarter. People follow him and pay attention, and he experiments a lot. Everything he does doesn't win and isn't done right, but he experiments, learns, and adapts. So I asked him about one of the changes. So his campaign that just ended, how do we pronounce that? Scythe? Is that how you pronounce it? Scythe. He did $1.8 million. Well, honestly, I mean, that's impressive, but is that really impressive? I mean, it's just, I hate to say this, becoming kind of like, okay. I mean, Steve, when you did Ogre, you almost broke the $1 million mark, right? And that was considered.
It was a record for a little while.
Yeah. Yep, almost $1 million. And now just almost routinely, we see campaigns just crank out and they're like, oh, they crossed $1 million. And nobody's just like, okay.
It's not a meaningful market anymore.
It's not.
What is a meaningful market?
Great question, Steve. Thanks for asking that. When Steve's Ogre campaign raised just under $1 million, he had 5,000 backers, or thereabouts, rough number. 5,000 backers is a great number. Because if you had 5,000 backers for your Kickstarter campaign, I mean, you'd be thrilled, right? Scythe, Jamie Stegmaier's game, just wrapped up 1.8 million with 17,000 backers. How many copies do you think he's probably going to publish? What do you think? Steve, what would you publish?
Probably about 35,000, like you told me earlier.
I didn't know. Come on. Okay. Probably about 30,000 might be a good number that he's willing to do. The future is not how much money you can raise on Kickstarter, but how big is the crowd you can attract. And when people ask for my help, that's the first thing I look at. How big is your crowd? Jamie Stegmaier has shown that he's got a pretty big crowd. Anybody want to take a guess? Exploding Kittens, how many backers they got? James, you know. It was just shy of 220,000 backers. When, the oatmeal? I have no idea. They got a bunch.
So is there a public metric from direct conversion?
Have no idea. Have no idea. It would be great. Andrew, why don't you go look that up for us, and then okay.
So as soon as you spend 10 years building an audience, and run your Kickstarter.
No, I'm saying just for him.
Just for him.
I'd like to know the direct conversion.
For oatmeal.
Yeah, from oatmeal to
Yeah.
exploding kittens versus the people catching the wave.
But this really kind of is the future. Is one of the things I'm arguing is that this new ecosystem is developing where the traditional. If I had a whiteboard, here's what I would draw. Okay, I'm going to turn my back to the camera. I apologize. But here at the bottom, you have your supply and demand. You have your supply. Traditional publishers over the years have a predictable amount of supply of product. At the top, you have your demand, which is has been a fairly predictable amount of demand. In the middle, you have this distribution channel, right? This pipe. The product is shoved through that gets from the publishers to the supply to the demand. That's how it kind of looked. Well, then what happens? Kickstarter came along, and boom, the supply exploded. You know, it started off in 2011. I think I mentioned there was 106 successful campaigns on Kickstarter for games in 2011. They raised a total of $2 million. Right? Jamie just did that almost all by himself last week. Right? 4 years later. And how many new games do we see popping up on Kickstarter every day? Every day, right? I think I saw a stat that said Fantasy Flight Games in the history of the company has 200 games in their history of their company, right? And you think about so that means every 20 days, every 3 weeks, if Kickstarter was a publisher, they're producing as many games. Now, only 1 out of 3 are succeeding, so we've got to go 6 weeks, or whatever the number. Don't do math live in front of a live camera. That is one of the rules. But this exploded. This pipe, like a python trying to swallow a pig, has been overwhelmed, which is one of the arguments I made that's broke. Because all this product started to go through the only channel that existed. The distribution channel that put products from publishers, traditional publishers, into retailers, traditional retailers. Now, the internet came along a little bit before that and kind of started to mess this up a little bit because publishers were finding ways to get to consumers through internet, not really following the traditional channel, but it really wasn't that. I mean, it has been an impact, particularly if you own a game store, that has been an impact. But this flood of new products, I mean, if you walked into a game store, do you think they have enough room to put 50 new games on their shelf every month? Right? No, it's crazy. So this flood is pushing its way through this python like a pig, okay? And it's just choking the life out of it because established game publishers are like, no, it's fine, we're doing fine. Because, by the way, that pipe got a little bigger to carry more of copies of our one game, but not necessarily to cover 100 new games. So what happened then is demand, on the other hand, it kind of started to not explode, but then suddenly it exploded. A couple of things caused that explosion. I argue that Cards Against Humanity has been a huge impact on game demand because just like that young woman who walked by, one of the things she said to me, I said, well, what's Cards Against Humanity like? Well, it's kind of like Apples to Apples, right? We've heard that. It's an adult version of Apples to Apples. That was her idea of a board game, was Apples to Apples or Monopoly or Scrabble. I mean, what we're doing is that more and more people suddenly became introduced to different types of games. James Matthew runs several game stores, and I asked him earlier in the evening, how many people at Christmas walk into his store who have never been there looking to purchase a copy of Cards Against Humanity and willing to pay double the price off the web, right? You sell it at 45, Amazon sells it at 25. They walk into your store, they've never been there before. They walk into your store, and it's usually, you said it's often 150 right before Christmas. At double the price, you bought it off of Amazon, and you're just marking up the price. And who's buying this game? Not willing to give their information. We learned something tonight, didn't we? And another source that we discovered. Who was that was telling us? JT, was that you?
James by James, a big store up in Mall of America. They sell it for $50 a unit, and they sell it to kids that don't have credit cards, but they want the game.
These are kids that are probably buying video games at $50, so they have $50 of disposable income they're willing to spend, and then they turn around and spend $50 on Cards Against Humanity. My point is that Cards Against Humanity, I've been talking about for about 3 years, that it had started to drive traffic of non-gamers into the game industry. This demand started to grow. And then something like Exploding Kittens comes along and introduces 200,000 people to the board game space. Many of those people, whether they play the game or not, are suddenly introduced to this concept, this game idea that their games are far beyond anything they've experienced. So in the board game space, what you're seeing crowdfunding do is break down and just choke to death the life of this tenuous connection between supply and demand. And one of the things I think that you're going to see coming is a reevaluation of the relationship between the consumer and the product. Now, I said that carefully because I don't think that model is going to go away. But there's this whole new ecosystem that's starting to be built up. I talked to Jamie about Scythe. He said 250 retailers reached out to him and said, I want to pledge at the retail level and get your game when it comes. And I said, Jamie, let me just be clear. 250 retailers are willing to bypass the Alliance, ACD, and GTS in order to get your game? Because they will be able to get through distribution. He said, yes. 250 retailers are willing to work with me directly to get my game. Steve?
So are they bypassing, or are they just getting in on the earliest shipment?
So Steve's question is, are they bypassing or are they getting in on the earliest shipment? My answer is, I'm not sure I know exactly the answer other than they're willing to not go through distribution to get copies of a game.
They might turn around next week and get copies through distribution.
They might. So
All we know is that they're making an order from the earliest source possible.
So Steve's comment is, all we know is that they're making an order from the earliest source possible. True. My point is, they are establishing a personal relationship with a game publisher where traditionally they would have only worked with a distributor. So the point I'm making is that what we're seeing in the future is retailers are finding ways to start to build a personal relationship through different means because supply and demand seem to be broken. And they just need the product. So James Matthew is willing to go out and buy the products on Amazon to sell to customers who are willing to buy it from him, even though they could have got it on Amazon. So the future is showing us that there is a new model, I believe, that is evolving, that all this money is funneling in, and that the demand is becoming bigger and bigger, and that people are just going to find ways to get the product they want. And if retailers or publishers find ways to establish relationships with those consumers, that those publishers, that this is an evolving model. Last thing I want to talk about, as I wrap up here, is JT and GameCrafter. There's a great book out there called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. It's been out for about 15 years. In that book, he claims that established players in a mature market, it's almost impossible for them to become innovative in changing and disrupting the very model that they live in. For example, Microsoft, okay, Microsoft's software company. Why has Microsoft struggled to get into the phone business, the mobile business? Why has Microsoft struggled to get into so many other businesses when they had so much money and so much market share. One of the arguments is that Clayton Christensen makes, his premise is that they can't disrupt it because the value chain that exists for their software to move through the traditional channels, every person along the way is vested in making that work. And to disrupt it, to go with some kind of other model, the economies of scale don't work. It's less profitable, it's slower, it doesn't meet the needs of exactly the way I want, what I want. The example that Clayton used in his book was the disk drive industry. When the 8-inch disk drives were quite popular, some folks invented the 5¼ inch disk drive, floppy disk. And they went around to all the 8-inch guys and said, hey, we got this 5¼ Well, is it faster? Well, no. Does it hold more data? Well, no. Is it cheaper per byte of storage? Well, no. It's actually more expensive. We're not interested. So they went and then found some folks who, because this new thing had just come out called a PC. The 8 inches were sold to mini computer folks. The PC had just come out. 8-inch doesn't work. So they went to those who valued the size over the price, and that the price that they were, so they sold these 5¼ inch, and every single 8-inch floppy disk drive company went out of business. And the 5¼ are the ones that emerged, the Seagates. Then some guys invented a 3½ inch drive floppy disk. And they went around to all the 5¼ inch guys and said, we got this 3½, it's great. Is it faster? No. Does it store more data? No. Is it cheaper? No. But it's smaller. Nobody was interested. Except for this company called Compaq, which had just come out with this portable computer. And the 3½ was perfect. You guys, I know that you remember opening up your PCs in your 5¼ inch, your 3½ inch bay. You'd look at it, it was actually a 5¼ inch bay that they just stuck the 3½ inch, remember? Yeah, it was just like, it was crazy. Guess what? Almost every single one of those 5¼ inch folks went out of business in the 3½. And actually, it continued to keep going all the way down. And their point was that the people who were invested in that couldn't find a way to disrupt themselves. JT and GameCrafter, when Matt Warden was doing his demonstration, it was perfect. He showed you how many years ago was that? 6 years ago, he showed the first product he got from your company. And it was horrendous. Really? You're going to stand up here and defend that piece of... Right? It had a nice sticker. Good thing you're not in the sticker business. But the thing in Innovator's Dilemma, as they talk about, is that you find somebody who comes in and disrupts it at a lower price point. It's not more efficient. It actually doesn't meet all the high-end qualities of those additional features. But it meets the needs of a small segment because it's more convenient, and in some ways it's slightly cheaper than the alternative, which would be mass production of 1,500 copies or something like that. So JT's company started these one-offs, which is exactly what disruptive companies do in a traditional industry. Then what Matt held up was the next copy of the game. It was Jumpgate was his game. And the next copy, it had a really pretty box, but it had some additional problems that he continued to have. And then the next version and the next version. And so I saw JT present this week some cool things that are coming from GameCrafter. And when he asked for questions, my response was, wow. Because what happens is, in every classic example of this, is that through iteration, through small incremental changes, you get closer and closer to the tipping point of the market's demand for what they exactly want. And my belief is that GameCrafter is getting closer and closer to a price point and a quantity that allows them to deliver exactly what you, as a board game publisher, need to hit that sweet spot. I asked Jason Glover, how many units do you need to publish to basically break even? His answer was, if I could get 500 units, that's about right. Well, we've already heard that you can almost find no publisher that's willing to publish at 500 units. Excuse me, thank you, manufacture at 500 units. But GameCrafter is willing to do that, and at some point, GameCrafter's prices continue to, JT continued to introduce feature after feature, and well, what's the cost for that? It was either 0 or less, meaning that you were paying more money, but we've added this new feature, and now it's going to cost you less money. Am I doing okay without giving away any secrets? And that is exactly what starts to happen in a disruption of an economy, is that he's following the classic pattern of introducing just creeping up on that minimal need where there's going to be a cross, and the market is going to say, you know what? I could run a Kickstarter, get 500 backers, and just run it all on GameCrafter and make enough money that I don't have to go to China. I don't have to go print 2,500 copies. I'll only print what I need and still make enough money to justify it. And that's why I believe that that's where the future is going, is that the idea that the Jamie Stegmeyers who are going to print 35,000 copies, that's great. And that's what you're hoping for. But you're going to find that one developer after another, a publisher after another, is going to find a way to serialize the creation of games so that they do 300 copies at a time, 500 copies at a time, 700 copies at a time. And something like the GameCrafter is going to make that possible. And one of the other things is that if you notice, the amount of effort and investment to get for JT and team to get to where they are now is now becoming an incredible barrier to entry for somebody else to compete with them. Traditional publishers aren't going to do it because it's too small. Here's my last question to you. Why is China where they're producing so much quantity? What's the main factor in China that's allowing them to produce so much quality and quantity, shipping it back to the US? Why can they produce it so cheap? Labor. Okay, that's the answer I always hear. It's labor. But guess what? It's not. Let's not even go there. Traditional publishers here in the US are operating with equipment. How old do you think, Steve? I'm sorry, I keep using the wrong word. Manufacturers. Traditional manufacturers.
I understood the question, and I don't know. Old, you're right.
Old.
Astro just sold off their printing side because
It's the technology. Because China, how long has China been in the publishing business? 20 years tops, 10, 15. Some of the newer ones probably 5. And how modern is their equipment? What's that? Some of it's ancient, but the folks we've been dealing with are running some pretty sophisticated new equipment that allows them to do some pretty cool stuff.
Heidelberg, Germany, properly maintained. Those are good for another few years, but they won't have the features.
They don't have the features, and what we're looking for is the ability to be extremely flexible in a tiny niche market that traditionally isn't going to generate tens of thousands, but maybe only hundreds or thousands of backers. And that's what the big difference in China is, actually technology. They have better technology at that level than we do. We can send it over, they can print it and send it back for cheaper, and it's actually not the labor. It's the technology, yeah.
Why are more United States plants not buying that technology?
The reason that more United States plants aren't buying that technology is because of this value chain I just talked about. Their customers are still in the same mold and giving them money to continue to do the same thing. For them to now invest and recover that money, first of all, publishing in the US, let's call it publishing, is dropping off so fast. There's no more newspapers to publish. There's no more magazines to publish. They're losing their customers. And the market they ignored, the tiny little novelty printing that has basically driven the board game industry, they ignored that. And it suddenly grew up, and they got left behind, which is the classic innovator's dilemma. They can't innovate to disrupt their own industry because their own customers are preventing them from doing that. Okay? That's what's happening right now. The board game industry is going through this massive change because innovators, you, are learning new ways of doing things that doesn't require you to go through the traditional distribution models, publishing models, or manufacturing models that allows you to change all of that. Okay? So that's kind of the one aspect of the future. We could talk for hours. And I promised that I'd only go for 30 minutes. I'm already 40 minutes, so I'm already 10 minutes over my allotted time. Do I have any questions? I can only take a couple of questions. Any questions? What's that?
Where's that music coming from?
The party that we all want to go to. Yeah.
Do you know anybody that wants to invest a lot of money into the game graphic? I'm being serious. I'm being serious.
No.
We have a couple of opportunities that
Do you have a prospectus?
we have some data. We're kind of early in the consideration process.
There-
As you know, the market in Europe is even larger than it is in the US, and we
So-
have a replicatable business.
You do.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, Cyrus.
You were talking about the distribution pipe, the analogy of the python.
The pig.
Is you seeing anything with the numbers when you're watching that the overall community is becoming less and less amused by the
Great question. His question is the distance between the campaign ending and when the product's delivered. All right? And this is another topic I always talk about, late, when a project's late delivery. I say that's bogus. There's no such thing as late. It's like it's a wizard. It arrives exactly when it means to, okay? To make a Lord of the Rings reference. Is that, what do you mean it's late? Who set the artificial date that that product was going to be delivered? You did when you created your campaign. But if you were to add another 2 months to the delivery date, when you backed it, would backers not back your project because it went from 6 months to 8 months of delivery? No, would they change? Hang on. Okay, let me ask, if it went from 8 months to 12 months, would you change your backing? You're saying, hang on, you're saying you don't look at those numbers. Let me finish up. Jeff, what do you think? If I went from 8 months, it's going to be delivered 8 months after the project to 12 months after the project. Does that change the number of backers I get? Maybe. If I went from 12 months to 18 months, absolutely. So there is a date kind of in the heads. This is all anecdotal. We just believe it's an opinion, which has no basis of any type of information or knowledge. But yeah, there appears to be that you can give, and backers, I just backed Jamie's project, $119, whatever, and I looked at the delivery date, August of 2016. I thought, why did I just do that, right? But then I thought, I don't care, right? I really don't care. And I'm going to walk away, and when it shows up on my door, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I backed that project.
That's the part that kills me about today's society. We want everything now. We live in this fast food idea.
Except,
All this money to get something.
but it appears that Kickstarter turns that model on its head. There appear to be 17,000 people willing to give Jamie $100 for him to keep for a year before they see a product. So that kind of turns that model on its head. Steve.
The question was everything anecdotal, or was there a source of data correlating time to delivery to success of products, or to anything else?
All anecdotal at this point, as far as I know, other than a lot of these asking people just what I just did, a poll. And when I do the 12 months to 18 months, that's always, everybody's like, I would not back a project for 18 months.
Yeah, I saw where you put that card in your sleeve, because that was a huge jump.
It was.
And it went from 12 months, which is a magic number. If you'd gone from 11 to 13 or something weird like that,
Yeah.
try that next time.
Video games are years late, right? So my argument is that it appears that this concept of delivery due to immediate want seems to be a rather flexible, squishy number. And I call it the project, hang on, Andrew, I'll get you, the project that just keeps on giving. It's like you get this emotional lift when you back a project. It's kind of like, cool, I just backed that project. Then you get this emotional lift when the project funds. Like, cool, I just backed a winner. And then you get this emotional lift when the project actually shows up on your doorstep, because he's like, oh yeah, I backed that project, right? And then when people say, well, are you upset that the project took so long? And you're like, oftentimes, I mean, how many projects are you backing right now that you don't remember that you're backing, and that you don't even know when they're going to come? You haven't even looked. So that's my point. From an anecdotal standpoint, it appears to not be as big a critical issue as we might think it might be. Yes, Andrew.
From my perspective, I don't know how common it is, but if I look at a project and I see that they expect delivery in a month, and I'm looking at all of the stuff that's in the game, that actually worries me more than if I see 9 months out. I'm like,
Explain that again. Are you talking as a backer?
as a backer.
Yes.
If I'm looking at a project and it's complex, and there's a lot going on with it, and their delivery date is
30 days.
months, yeah, that to me, I'm like, oh.
That's two things are going on there. Two things are going on. One, they're clueless,
Or they already have them.
or they already have them. So a good person is Seth Mayday Games, right? Right? Or is it Hyatt? No. Hyatt, right? His games are already, I mean, he's admitted. He just uses it for marketing.
Which is fine. Those are the people that you're going to look at. There's definitely a trend, at least in my circles, where you look at the experience of the person that's launched. Like, okay, like there's some sort of credibility. How many
Monetization of reputation is what I call that. That's right.
So huge. And if somebody's like, yeah, I've created 15 projects, they've all successfully funded, and I myself have backed 300 things on
Yes, you will. That's right. Okay, I'm out of time. Feel free. I'm here all day tomorrow. Feel free if you'd like to talk, chat. You can find me on iTunes at Funding the Dream on Kickstarter. You can find me on Twitter, Richard Bliss. You can find me on Facebook, Richard Bliss. You can find me on LinkedIn, Richard Bliss. Pretty much Richard Bliss is how you can find me. If you'd like to follow up or talk. Yeah, Jeff? It's Richard Bliss. Yep, and it really seems to work. All right, thank you, everybody.